You're about to witness a moment that began with a quiet request and ended with a lesson in honor so profound it permanently changed every person who saw it. It happened in the sterile marble lobby of a bank, a place of polite fictions and quiet transactions. But on this day, the silence would be broken by an act of breathtaking disrespect aimed at a man who was the living embodiment of honor itself. His name was Arthur Finch, and the world was about to test him one last time. He moved with a quiet economy of motion, the kind learned in places where wasted energy was a fatal luxury. A slight, almost imperceptible limp in his right leg was a ghost of a memory from a jungle floor, half a world, and a lifetime away. His wool coat was old, the elbows worn thin, but it was spotless, brushed clean. A faint, white scar cut a clean line above his right eyebrow, a silent testament to a moment when things had gone wrong. Pinned to the lapel of his coat was a single small pin of a silver eagle, its features worn smooth by the touch of his thumb over countless years. It wasn't meant for others to see. It was a covenant he kept with himself. Arthur Finch was not there for himself. He was on a mission of love. His granddaughter, a brilliant young woman with his late wife's eyes and a future as wide as the sky, was starting her first semester at the state university. She needed $500 for textbooks, a sum that felt like a king's ransom. He was here to draw from an old military stipend account, a relic of his past, to clear a path for her future. He stood in line, an island of calm in the frantic energy of modern finance. When his turn came, he stepped up to the counter, into the orbit of a man named Davies. Mr. Davies was the branch manager, a man who wore his ambition like an ill-fitting suit. His smile was a corporate tool deployed without warmth. His eyes, quick and dismissive, saw not a man, but a transaction, a delay. "How can I help you?" Davies asked, his tone a polished veneer over a core of impatience. "I would like to make a withdrawal," Arthur said. His voice was soft, but it held a certain gravel of authority. He slid a withdrawal slip and a thin laminated card across the gleaming counter. Davies's fingers tapped on his keyboard, a rapid, irritated staccato. A frown tightened his features. "This is a dormant account, sir, extremely old. We are going to require more substantial identification to proceed." The "sir" was a formality, empty of respect. "Of course," Arthur replied, unfazed. He reached into his coat and retrieved a worn leather wallet. Instead of a driver's license, he carefully unfolded a single piece of paper. It was a military pay stub, yellowed to the color of old ivory, dated 1971. Stamped across the top, in faded but still legible red ink, were two words, "classified." And next to the pay grade information was a project code, a ghost of the Cold War. Project Nightshade. He laid it on the counter. It was a statement of fact. This was the moment the ground should have shifted, but the world Arthur had entered did not operate on the currency of his past. The gap between his expectation and the manager's reality was about to open into a canyon. Davies picked up the paper between his thumb and forefinger, as if handling something distasteful. A smirk curled his lip. "Project Nightshade," he scoffed, his voice loud enough for the adjacent tellers to hear. "Sounds like a bad video game from the 80s. He held the paper up to the light, feigning scrutiny. "Sir, with all due respect, this looks like something you printed in your basement last night." With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the document onto the counter. It fluttered down like a dead leaf. If you believe a man's character is shown not by how he argues, but by how he endures, hit that like button now. The silence of Arthur Finch is a lesson in power you need to see to believe. The quiet hum of the bank faltered. A few customers looked over. Behind the counter, the young teller, Jessica, felt a hot blush of shame creep up her neck. She saw the old man's face. It was a mask of calm, but she saw the flicker in his eyes. It wasn't anger, it was something far deeper. It was a profound, soul-wearing disappointment. She knew in her gut this was wrong, a violation of something sacred, but the fear of her manager was a cold hand on her throat, choking her words. Arthur Finch looked at the pay stub, his life's secret work dismissed as a cheap forgery. He showed no rage. He offered no protest. This was the moment his true character was revealed. He was a man forged in pressure, a man whose spirit had been tempered in fires Davies couldn't even imagine. He simply deliberately picked up the paper. He folded it carefully along its original fragile creases and placed it back in his wallet. He then turned from the counter. "I will wait." he said, his voice no more than a whisper, yet it seemed to cut through the sterile air. He walked to a hard-backed chair against the wall, a piece of furniture meant for brief, uncomfortable waits. He sat down, placed both hands over the top of his cane, and stared at the American flag waving in the wind outside. He became perfectly, unnervingly still. He was an anchor of dignity in a sea of awkwardness. His silence was a thunderclap. It was a rebuke more powerful than any shout. Davies felt its sting. His authority had been challenged not by aggression, but by an unassailable calm, and he couldn't stand it. He needed to reassert his dominance. "Keep an eye on him," Davies called out, his voice a little too loud, a performance for the rest of the lobby. "We get these stolen valor types in here all the time, trying to scam the system. If he makes a scene, have him removed." The guard nodded, his gaze uncertain. The tension in the bank became a physical presence. Customers shuffled their feet. Conversations died. But in the quiet, insulated world of the back offices, a different story was unfolding. A senior clerk, a man who had started at the bank when its ledgers were actual books, had overheard the name Arthur Finch and the phrase Project Nightshade. The words were a key, unlocking a memory from decades ago. He walked not to a computer, but to a heavy, fireproof filing cabinet that held the bank's oldest protocols. Inside a thick, leather-bound binder titled Continuity Protocol Cold War Era, he found a single line, a name, a code, and a direct private phone number with an instruction in stark, unambiguous capital letters. In case of activation, call immediately. Do not delay. Do not ask questions. His hand was steady as he picked up his desk phone and dialed. The call was answered on the first ring with a single clipped word. Secure. The old clerk took a deep breath, his heart pounding with the weight of a history he had almost forgotten. He spoke 5 words, a code from a bygone era, into the phone. "Nightshade is at the trust," he said. "The eagle is waiting." As Mr. Davies postured in the lobby, reveling in the public humiliation of a quiet old man, he was utterly oblivious to a fundamental law of the universe he had just set in motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. But the reaction that was now screaming down the interstate toward his tidy, predictable world wasn't just equal. It was absolute. And it was overwhelming. The silence in the First National Trust had grown a thick, suffocating skin. It was no longer the awkward silence of a social misstep. It was the sacred silence of a showdown. It pulsed with the quiet, unyielding presence of Arthur Finch, who sat in his chair by the window, a sentinel of a forgotten age. His stillness was not empty. It was full. It was full of discipline, of control, of a lifetime spent mastering the art of waiting for the right moment. Every tick of the clock was a testament to his strength. Every shallow breath from the disgraced manager, Mr. Davies, was a testament to his weakness. Davies paced behind the counter, a caged animal of his own making, his smug confidence having evaporated into a greasy film of sweat on his forehead. He glanced at the old man, expecting, hoping for an outburst, for some crack in that serene facade that would justify his contempt. But Arthur gave him nothing. He simply sat, his gaze fixed on the flag outside, as if the petty drama of the bank was nothing more than a passing cloud. And then came the sound. It began outside, a low guttural hum that cut through the city traffic. The sound of power. 2 black SUVs, polished to a mirror shine, pulled up to the curb with military precision, engines humming with contained force. The doors opened in perfect silent unison, and from the lead vehicle emerged a man who seemed to command the very air he displaced. He was Major General Marcus Thorne, and he did not walk. He advanced. His boots struck the marble floor, not with the sound of leather, but of judgment. Click, clack, click, clack. Each step was a hammer blow against the bank's fragile peace. Each step was a measure of the reckoning that had arrived. The room froze. Conversations died mid-word. Pens stopped scratching. Mr. Davies, in the middle of a nervous gesture, froze with his hand in the air. General Thorne's presence was a physical force, a gravitational pull that bent the entire room to his will. His dress uniform was a tapestry of a life lived at the sharp end of history, his chest a formidable bank of ribbons that told stories of conflict and courage. but it was his eyes that held the true power. They were the eyes of a man who had weighed life and death on a global scale, and they were now filled with a cold, focused fire. He did not scan the room. He did not acknowledge the stunned manager or the gaping customers. His gaze, like a guided missile, shot across the lobby and locked onto the still figure of Arthur Finch. Thorne strode across the floor until he stood 3 feet from the old man's chair. He stopped. His body went ramrod straight, and then, in the suffocating silence, he executed a salute. It was a blur of motion, a crack of energy so sharp, so precise, it was an audible event, a soundless thunderclap that echoed with decades of respect. Colonel Finch, the general's voice was low, but it resonated with the authority of a command that had sent men into battle. It has been too long. Slowly, as if rising from a great depth, Arthur Finch looked up. A flicker of recognition, of surprise, crossed his features. With a deliberation that was both weary and immensely graceful, he rose to his feet. He met the general's salute with one of his own, his form still perfect, an echo of the young officer he once was. The instant the salute was returned, the power structure of the room was not just altered, it was annihilated and rebuilt from the ground up. Thorne dropped his hand and turned his glacial gaze upon Mr. Davies. The manager looked as if he had been struck by lightning. Thorne took one slow, deliberate step toward the counter. He did not shout. Shouting was for men who weren't sure they would be obeyed. "I was told," the general began, his voice dangerously soft, "that the identity of Colonel Arthur Finch was questioned in this establishment. I am here to correct the record." He leaned forward, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let me tell you a story, Mr. Davies, a lesson in history you clearly never received." He began. "In the fall of 1983, I was a young captain serving as a military attaché in a hot, dusty corner of South America. A violent coup ignited overnight. The government we supported collapsed in a matter of hours. The embassy was besieged. My team and I were trapped, designated as acceptable losses by a transmission from Washington. The official order was clear. Do not interfere. For 3 days, we listened to the world end outside our walls." He paused, his eyes boring into Davies. "On the 4th night, when we were out of ammunition and hope, we heard the drone of an engine, a rusty civilian cargo plane, a relic that had no business flying, let alone in a war zone, landed on a stretch of dark highway. The pilot had no orders. He had no official sanction. He was acting on a single piece of intelligence and his own conscience. That pilot," Thorne's voice dropped, "was Major Arthur Finch. He broke a dozen regulations and a direct order to fly into the heart of that chaos. He got all 13 of us out. When we landed on friendly soil, he was met by MPs and escorted to his commanding officer to be officially reprimanded for his actions. He accepted the black mark on his pristine record without a word of protest. He traded a piece of his career for 13 lives." The general straightened up. "That, Mr. Davies, is leadership. It is not about blindly enforcing rules you don't understand. It is about knowing in your soul which rules to break, to uphold a higher law. You never leave your people behind." Davies was white as a sheet, his mouth hanging slightly open. "But you are not done learning." Thorne pressed on, relentless. "You mocked a document, a piece of history, Project Nightshade. You said it sounded like a video game." He let out a short, sharp, humorless laugh. "After the incident I just described, Colonel Finch left active duty. But he did not stop serving his country. He brought his unique mind for logistics and covert operations to the Treasury Department. He was tasked with solving a problem. How do we protect our nation's most secret assets, the deep cover operatives whose very existence is a classified secret? How do we protect their families?" He devised a quiet, brilliant solution, a ghost network within the commercial banking system designed to allow those operatives to access funds without leaving a single trace, a financial shield built on anonymity and trust. He called it Project Nightshade. The general swept his hand around the lobby. This very bank was a pilot location for that program. The account you dismissed, the pay stub you mocked, they weren't just old. They were the cornerstones of a system that has protected American lives for over 40 years. You stand here in a fortress of financial security you cannot comprehend, built by the mind of the very man you just called a fraud. The lesson was complete. The truth had been deployed, and it had detonated in the center of the room, leaving nothing but a stunned, ringing silence in its wake. Jessica was staring at Arthur, her eyes wide with a dawning, profound respect. The customers were no longer watching a scene. They were witnesses to a revelation. If you have ever had a mentor, a leader, a quiet professional who took the time to teach you a lesson that changed your life, tell us about them in the comments below. Your stories are a tribute to the leaders who don't seek the spotlight, but who cast a very long shadow. General Thorne had not come to the bank to punish a man. He had come to restore an idea. He had laid bare the history, the service, the sacrifice. He had recalibrated the scales of honor, and the restoration of that honor is a far more powerful, a far more meaningful act than any form of simple revenge. What happened next was not about settling a score. It was about setting a new and permanent standard. The lesson was over. The truth had been deployed in the center of the First National Trust Bank, and the silence it left behind was absolute. In that silence, reputations were unwritten, hierarchies were dismantled, and the true nature of honor was revealed not as a faded piece of paper, but as a living, breathing force. General Marcus Thorne had not come to win a battle. He had come to end a war on the soul of one of his finest men. Now, all that remained was to account for the casualties and rebuild on the hallowed ground. The bank's regional president, a harried man named Wallace, finally found his voice, speaking to General Thorne but looking at the disgraced Mr. Davies. General, he'll be terminated immediately. I can assure you, his actions do not reflect the values of this institution. Thorne raised a hand, cutting him off. No, he said, the word sharp and final. Davies, who had been expecting the axe to fall, looked up in stunned confusion. You will not fire him. Firing him is an escape. It allows him to walk away from this moment, angry and self-justified. It allows him to forget. He will not be allowed to forget. The general's eyes narrowed, and in them was the cold, calculating brilliance of a master strategist. Effective Monday morning, Mr. Davies is being given a new training opportunity. You will reassign him to the bank's central archives. For 1 month, 30 days, his only duty will be to personally handle, read, and digitally catalog the service records associated with every single veteran's account in this entire metropolitan district. He will touch the history he disrespected. He will read the names of the men who served in the Ardennes, in Incheon, in Khe Sanh. He will hold the evidence of their lives in his hands until he understands that this institution, this nation, is built upon a foundation of sacrifice he was too blind to see. He will not be punished. He will be educated. It was a sentence of profound and devastating justice. Not a termination, but a forced pilgrimage through the very history he had mocked. It was a chance, Thorne was saying, for the man to find a piece of his own honor, buried deep beneath his arrogance. Then Thorne's gaze softened as it fell upon Jessica, the young teller who had stood frozen in fear and shame. He had seen everything. He had seen her silent, agonized conflict. Mr. Wallace, the general said, his voice now calm. This young lady showed character. In the face of her superior's blatant disrespect, she demonstrated a quiet integrity. She knew what was right, even when she was afraid to act on it. That is the rarest and most valuable quality an organization can possess. He looked directly at Jessica. That is the character you build a future on. He turned back to Wallace. Promote her. Put her on the management track. Today. Wallace, eager to please, nodded vigorously. Consider it done, General. Absolutely. He then hurried to Arthur's side, his demeanor one of utter deference. Colonel Finch, please, let me handle this transaction, and let me explain. That account? It's what we used to call a signal account. It was part of the very protocol you designed. After 20 years of dormancy, any activity, any inquiry at all, was programmed to trigger a silent, high-level alert to a special liaison office at the Pentagon. We were already mobilizing the moment Mr. Davies looked up your name, the system you built to watch over others. Wallace said, his voice full of awe, was still watching over you. For the first time since the ordeal began, a small weary smile touched Arthur Finch's lips. The ghost in the machine he'd designed decades ago had remembered him. The system had worked. With quiet efficiency, Wallace completed the withdrawal. $500 was counted out and placed in an envelope. Wallace then began to speak of a more substantial gesture, a significant sum from the bank's discretionary fund as a formal apology for the distress caused, but Arthur held up a hand, stopping him. "That won't be necessary." "But Colonel, we insist." "I came here for the books," Arthur said, his voice gentle but firm. "The rest is just noise." He took the envelope, tucked it into his coat, and nodded once. His mission was complete. The promise to his granddaughter would be kept. As General Thorne prepared to escort him out, Arthur did one final unexpected thing. He turned and walked back to the counter where Mr. Davies stood, a man utterly broken, awaiting his month-long sentence in the dusty catacombs of the archives. Arthur stopped in front of him. The young manager couldn't meet his eyes, staring down at the marble floor in shame. Arthur Finch reached out and placed his hand on Davies' shoulder. He didn't say a word, not of anger, not of forgiveness. It was a simple human touch, a gesture that was impossibly vast in its meaning. It was an acknowledgement of a painful lesson learned, a silent recognition of a shared, flawed humanity. And then he let go. Arthur Finch walked out of the First National Trust and into the afternoon sun, leaving behind a place that was fundamentally, irrevocably changed. His legacy was not the drama of that morning. It was what grew from its ashes. The following quarter, the First National Trust, under the guidance of Mr. Wallace and with consultation from General Thorne's office, rolled out a new mandatory training program for every employee in every branch across the nation. They called it the Finch Protocol. Its mission was to train employees to recognize and respectfully handle the unique needs of veteran clients, to understand the history behind the documents they carried, and to offer assistance with quiet dignity. The young woman chosen to lead this national initiative was Jessica. The student had become the teacher. Arthur's legacy was not a name on a plaque. It was a living action, a standard of respect, a protocol of honor being taught to a new generation. In the end, the arrival of General Thorne was not the climax of this story. It was merely the consequence. The true climax happened in the silence when Arthur Finch chose to sit and wait. The story of that morning was not written by a general's power, but by a colonel's character. It reminds us that our nation's history is held not just in monuments of stone, but in the quiet hearts of the men and women who walk among us, in our fathers, our grandfathers, our neighbors. They are the Arthur Finches in our own lives. They do not ask for parades or recognition. They ask only for one thing from us: that we remember, that we build a country worthy of their sacrifices and their silence. The ultimate lesson of the Finch Protocol is not for banks. It is for us. It is a call to see the eagle pin on a worn lapel, to hear the history in a quiet voice, to honor the dignity of those who have already paid the price for our peace. Their footsteps echo all around us. It is our sacred duty to listen. Thank you for joining us on NX Incredible Stories. Subscribe and press that bell icon so you never miss a story that reminds us of the quiet giants who walk among us. Your support helps us keep their incredible legacies alive and remembered. We'll see you next time.